They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
And I would cite you to the Apostle Paul and his clear and wise command in Romans 13 to obey the laws of the government because God is a...
I read today about a 10-year-old girl with Down syndrome who was taken from her mother and put in a cage. I read about did you say want to a 10-year-old with Down syndrome
what
being taken from her mother?
What I said is you can pick anything you want out, but the bottom...
What's going on, guys? It's your boy Sean T, and we back with another edition of Unless You Sing. Today our topic is immigration, and now I know you guys probably feel like you know everything about immigration at this point because it's been plastered all over the news for like 3 weeks now. But personally, what I've seen missing from a lot of the news is just discussion over the bare bones of these issues. You know, the breaking down of the really tough questions that start the divide between different schools of thought on both undocumented immigrants and just immigration in general. So when creating this video, I decided to research popular claims about the negative effects of immigration and undocumented immigrants, as well as counter-arguments to them, so that I could come to a holistic understanding of the issue before I came to my own conclusions about it. And while this video will hopefully be really interesting and informative, I did, however, have to leave out lots of different points and statistics that I found in my research because I simply just didn't want to overload you guys with a bunch of extra information in this video because I want you guys to be able to take these big specific points and statistics with you after this video is over. Alright, so without further ado, let's move on to what I found. So guys, we've all seen the videos of President Trump condemning Mexican immigrants with some pretty disgusting names. And he's done this because he's trying to stress that one of the reasons why we need harsher immigration laws is because of the low quality of immigrants that he thinks are coming across the border. And while it would be scary if those names he gave them were true, the data I found just doesn't support that. In particular, an extensive study done by the National Bureau of Economic Research estimated that immigrants, both legal and undocumented, have a much lower incarceration rate than native US citizens. In fact, the study showed that immigrants are only jailed at 1/5 the rate of native US citizens. And the most recently arrived immigrants in the US actually have the lowest rates of all immigrants in our country. So their crime rates are actually still trending down. So it turns out we actually got some pretty cool people coming over. But perhaps it isn't that, immigrants are bringing greater crime into our country. Maybe it's just that they're hurting the American economy, by, not paying taxes or taking welfare dollars from American citizens. That claim, after all, is very popular too, as in 2016, the Trump administration claimed that Obama's current immigration policy was costing US taxpayers up to $300 billion annually in net fiscal costs. But after researching and cross-referencing multiple articles, it's become apparent to me that this number is extremely misleading. That number is an estimation of the net fiscal cost of only first-generation immigrants, meaning that it doesn't take into account any of the future generations of immigrants in America. Which is really important because it turns out that second-generation immigrants are actually among the strongest economic and fiscal contributors in the entire US population, with average tax contributions greater than that of the native-born population. And when you look at all generations of immigrants, you find that they've actually had an overall positive fiscal impact on our country. But regardless of their overall economic and fiscal impact, there's still a very popular claim that many legal immigrants slide on paying their taxes, and that undocumented immigrants just don't pay their taxes at all. But once again, that's not true. Legal permanent residents are required to pay taxes from day one, and not only are they forced to pay all the same taxes as American citizens, but they aren't allowed to receive assistance from 4 of the major welfare programs, such as Medicaid and SNAP, aka food stamps. The only exception to this is for asylees and refugees, who still have to pay all the same taxes, but are allowed to receive assistance from all welfare programs, which economically makes sense, and just humanely makes sense. On the other hand, when it comes to undocumented immigrants, it turns out that almost half of them actually do file their income tax forms. This is because many immigrants believe that starting this paper trail in America will give them a better shot at attaining citizenship in the future, so they're actually given incentives to pay their taxes. As for the other 50% that don't file their income tax forms, they're most likely being paid in cash from extremely low-paying jobs, so they're not forced to report it. And I understand why they don't, because undocumented immigrants receive almost zero government assistance. Almost all the help they get is through only public schooling and emergency medical services. So all of their welfare programs like Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, SNAP, you name it, they don't get it. So no, immigrants, documented or not, are not hurting the economy, skipping on taxes, or abusing the welfare system. But you know, even with all that, even if everything I just said about immigrants is true, there are still many people who have an extremely negative view of undocumented immigrants because they claim that, you know, well, we still need people crossing our borders legally and following the laws, so if they don't want to do that, you know, that's their problem. They need to get in line and wait their turn. And while I do think that the laws of our country need to be respected, when it comes to immigration, it's just not that simple. To understand the reality of modern-day immigration, we first need to understand where most of the detainees along the Mexico-US border are coming from. In 2014, what is being called the Central American refugee crisis started. Hundreds of thousands of people, both families and lone children, began fleeing the Central American countries of El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras because of an extreme increase in gang violence and overall rising crime and murder rates. And although a significant effort was made under the Obama administration to inform Central Americans of the risks of migrating to the US, the Department of Health and Safety concluded that they're still making the choice to migrate here because to stay and wait would be more dangerous and risky than to make the journey to the US and just hope they can be granted asylum. And for those who are lucky enough to get here, it turns out that there is no line for them to wait in. In fact, there are only 3 primary ways to gain a legal residency in the US, either through a family connection, an employer, or through being granted asylum. The family option doesn't work for most of these people, and as far as the employment option, almost all permanent visas are given to those who are either highly skilled or extremely successful. Now there are temporary visas being issued as well, but these are specifically designed to not give you a path to permanent residency through them, which is what most of these families are really seeking. So that leaves us with only one other viable option, and that's access to the US through being granted asylum. But this is where it gets really tricky. In the past, people who were fleeing gang violence or domestic abuse, like most of these Central Americans are, were allowed to qualify for asylum. However, just last month, Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced that generally, people will no longer be able to qualify for asylum under those conditions. Sessions claims that this move will help open up the backlog at the border, but many of his critics believe that this is just a death sentence for many desperate fleeing families, women and children specifically. And if Sessions' new move hadn't made it hard enough already to be granted asylum, Secretary of Homeland Security Kirstjen Nielsen did. You see, the Trump administration was coming under fire for detaining people who were legitimately and legally seeking asylum at the border. So in an attempt to defend themselves, they sent Nielsen out to claim that they were only detaining these people because they weren't seeking asylum at ports of entry. And while this sounds reasonable, there's lots of migrants who don't have access to this information. So literally what is happening is that many migrants aren't even trying to come across illegally, but are being counted as illegal and being criminally prosecuted just because they didn't present themselves at the right spot. As immigration expert and president of KIND, Wendy Young reports, the vast majority of Central Americans have been presenting themselves and requesting asylum. It's not like a picking somebody up if they're sneaking across the border situation. When they encounter Border Patrol, they're saying they need protection. I mean, come on! But look, even if you did go to the port of entry, it is being reported that oftentimes people are being turned away from the port of entry due to a lack of space for them. And get this, guys, if you happen to be lucky enough to receive a hearing for your asylum case, well, it actually turns out that depending on where the immigration court is that your case is sent to, is actually a huge determinant of whether or not you'll be granted asylum. If you go somewhere like Boston, you have a pretty good shot, as 78% of asylum seekers are granted it there. But if you go somewhere like Atlanta, you aren't really looking too good, as only 2% of asylum seekers are granted it there. Oh, and I don't know if I forgot to mention this or not, but since these asylum seekers aren't actually US citizens yet, they're just in the process of trying to become US citizens, the US government has deemed that it's not really necessary for us to provide them with lawyers. Even though we give them all the other same rights as US citizens during the judicial process, and we give them the right to have a lawyer, we're just not going to provide them with one. Because we shouldn't have to pay for it just because, right? Guys, it just doesn't make sense to me. When I lay out all these facts, everything I researched and put into this video, and all the things I didn't put in this video, it just doesn't make any sense to me why this is our immigration system. It only makes sense if you don't want people coming here. And why wouldn't you want people coming here? I've laid it all out. They help us in so many ways, and it's just the freaking right thing to do. I don't understand. Because guys, it doesn't have to be like this. There are so many different kinds of policy that we could implement to ensure that our immigration system is more efficient, and to ensure that we're always lending a helping hand to those in need, and to ensure that we're always maintaining border security. There are ways to do all of this and more with our system. But guys, what's needed first, before any change in policy can occur, is a change of heart. For these people are not the thugs or the criminals that they've been made out to be. They're people who are fleeing their homes, the only places they've ever known, because they're trying to protect their families, just like anyone else would. And to them, we still are that beacon of hope, guys, that shining light in the distance, that way out of the darkness. Because in case anybody has forgotten, we still are a country of immigrants. Every single one of us. And that's amazing, because that's why our American identity has not been built around a common race or religion. It has been built around a common idea, a common belief that we are stronger in diversity, that we do not fear those who are different from us, we embrace them, that we do not turn our backs on those in need, but we lend our hands, and we especially do not fight for hate and division. We fight for love, unity, and acceptance. For that is the only way that we can move our country and our world forward. Take it from me, a proud native of the Rio Grande Valley and an even prouder third-generation Mexican immigrant. Thank you guys. Keep singing. We are the change the world needs. And we're gonna do it, baby. I love you guys.